Okay, this is a video about bubble sorting. Bubble sorting is essentially the concept of a bubble is that you've got a glass of water and all the bubbles come to the top. The big bubbles come to the top and the little ones stay down the bottom, right? So it's sorting from smallest to largest, or largest to smallest, or in alphabetical order from A to Z, or vice versa, Z to A, depending on how you want to do the sort. But the idea is that the concept of a bubble is the big bubbles come to the top. That's where the name comes from. Now, in our example right here, we're going to do a bubble sort of numbers from 5 through to 2 here in our array. We've got an array of 5, 3, 8, 4, 2. So we've got 5 numbers in here, and we're going to sort them from smallest number to the largest number. That's the type of sort that we're going to do, smallest through to largest. Now we're starting with this array of 5 characters here, and underneath this array I have drawn in a comment that gives us the index numbers, because remember, in Python the index number starts at 0, it doesn't start at 1. So number 5 is actually at index position 0, number 3 is at index position 1, so on and so forth. So you've got to remember the index positions of this. Normally you wouldn't put this comment in, but I'm putting it in to show you so you understand what the index positions are. So the first 2 lines of our code, we've created an array and it's got 5 numbers in it. The second line will print that array and show you the original list, right? So that's pretty simple. That's a pretty easy 2 lines of code. It's going to print us and show us our original array. Now the next one is a function down here, and this is a length function, len. Now the length function essentially finds the length of the array, how many things are inside the array. And if we actually ran just n equals length and then we printed n, it would come out with the number 5. It would say there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements in our array. So n would equal 5. Okay. However, when we're thinking about index numbers, remember we start at 0 and go to 4. So it doesn't give us a good indication of the index number. It gives us a good indication of how many items are in the array, but not the index number. So we're going to have to remember that and keep that in mind when we start to program this program. So now we're going to go down here and we're going to start going through this list. We're going to start going through each single one of these. And in fact, we're going to have to go through it at least 5 times, or 5 times to sort these numbers in order. There are 5 numbers there. We're going to have to go through 5 times to sort it. So we're going to say for everything in the range of n minus 1. Now we've got n minus 1 here, which we know is 5, minus 1, which gives us 4, because this links to our index number, which is 4 just here. So it's going to go through 0, it's going to go through 1, it's going to go through 2, it's going to go through 3, and now it's going to go through 4. It doesn't need to go up to 5 because there is no 5th number in here, and if we did that, Python would come up with an error. So this is why we get the length here, but we need to take 1 off to allow for our index numbers in here. So that's why that one's got the index numbers there. And this is considered an outer loop because it's going to loop through this whole thing 5 times. All right, so it's considered the outer loop because it's going to go through it. Then the inner loop is looking at the pairs of numbers. So number 5 and 3, then it's going to look at 3 and 8, then it's going to look at 8 and 4, and then it's going to look at 4 and 2. And in actual fact, those numbers will be moved around and they'll change as we go through the sorting list. So I'll explain how this happens down here in this section of code. Again, we've just created these variables I and j. They could be the word count, for count in the range, or for count 2 in the range of whatever, right? So these could just be different counts. So let's work through this one here. This one says for everything in the range of n minus 1 minus I. Now this is a bit of an interesting little line of code here, and this is the one that normally gets most students confused right here. And I'll try and explain how that works. This is saying for everything at the index positions here, minus 1, right, which gives us the index positions down to 4, same as we did up here, but it's then also saying minus I, minus the first one that you've got from here as well. And the reason it's doing that is it's saying that as you've gone one pass, one check all the way through here, as you've gone through there, you don't need to check that last number again. You should have already moved. Once we've done all this program here, it should have already moved the biggest number to the end here, so you don't need to go and check that biggest number at the end. So for example here, the first time we go through, I is going to equal to 0, right? So for 0, this is going to be 0 to 4. That's how we get our index numbers, 0 to 4, right? So the first time through, it's going to be a 0. So it's going to go in here for J, it's going to say 0 to 4 minus 0, so it's still going to be 4. It'll go through and it'll check the biggest number of the two, which I'm going to explain that in a minute, and then it'll go through and put them in order, which I'm going to explain. However, the second time it goes through, the I will become a 1. So then it'll be 5 minus 1 minus 1, which means you don't need to check the last number. So it only compares the unsorted numbers. It won't go through and check the last number. The next time it goes through the outer loop, I will become 2. So this would be 5 minus 1, which is a 4, minus 2, which means it won't check the last two numbers. The next time it goes through, the I becomes a 3, so then it won't check the last three numbers, so on and so forth. So this little line of code here essentially is saying to you, go through the array, but don't check that one. And then the second time it'll say, go through the array, don't check the 2. Go through the array, don't check the 3. And it'll keep doing that until it's got all the numbers sorted. So that's what that little bit of code just there does. That says, do the same looping through the array that you're doing up here, except don't go through the last one if we've got some numbers in there. And it works the first time because the first time is going to be 0. So it's going to be 0, then it'll be 1, then it'll be 2, then it'll be 3. So that's what that little line of code does. Now we have a conditional statement, and this checks the sizes of each position. So this is saying numbers J, and remember when you have square brackets, that represents the index number down here. And remember what I said, our first index number that we're going to be checking is going to be the 0. So we're going to check the 0 against the 1, okay? And it's going to say, okay, at position 0 I've got a 5, at position 1 I've got a 3. It's going to say if this one, the number 5, is bigger than the number 3, which in this case it is, you're going to swap them in positions. So you're going to say whatever was at number J is going to swap to number J plus 1. Whatever was at number J plus 1 is going to swap to number J. So you're going to swap those two positions. Then it goes through the loop again. And this time it's going to say this inner loop, just the inner loop. It goes through the inner loop again and says, okay, compare this one with this one, which would now be 5 and 8. And it's going to say, well, 5 is not bigger than 8, so we're going to work on the 8. So the third time through, it's going to say compare the 8 to the 4. So the 8 is bigger, so the 8 would swap and the 4 would go back. And then the last time here it'll go through, it'll swap the 8 with the 2. So our first printout will be something like 3, 5, 4, 2, 8, something like that, because the 8 will have moved to the end. Then it goes back to the outer loop. The I will then become 1, and then it goes through again. And remember, now that the I is 1, it won't check the 8. It'll leave the 8 exactly where it is, and it'll just check through these 4. And once it's sorted these 4, then it'll go through. The I will become 2. It won't check the last two numbers. It'll just go through and sort. So it sorts the unsorted numbers, only compares the unsorted numbers. At the end of that, and I've put in a couple of lines in here just so to show you how it works, this line here will print off after pass number, which would be pass number 1, the outer loop. Every time we've done the outer loop, these are the numbers in the array. And then at the end, it'll give you the final sorted list. So let's run it, because that might help you with understanding how it works. So I'm just going to save a few little changes I made there. Right, here's our original pass. That's our original numbers, 5, 3, 8, 4, 2. Then it went through this inner loop once, which means it went through all the numbers once on the inner loop. And we ended up with 5, 3, 4, 2, 8. So the 8, as I said, had been moved across. Then it goes to the outer loop, and this becomes number 1. And so it goes through the inner loop again. And this time it doesn't check the 8. The 8 stays where it is, and it only checks the other 4 numbers. And you'll see, for this pass, the 5 has moved to the last position. Then this goes around again, this becomes 2, and then it only checks the inner numbers. So it only checks these 3 numbers, these 2 numbers, and then it says that it's sorted, and that's our final list. So that's the way that this bubble sort works. Now I'm going to do another example using words instead of using numbers. If you're unsure of how this works, go back and watch the section of the video again and try and see if you can work out how, once you've seen it run, I think it helps you, try and work out how I've explained this to you to see if you understand that. Okay, so this is part 2 of the video, and this one has a bubble sort using a string. So instead of using numbers, and we're sorting numbers from, we did last time, from smallest to largest, this time we're doing a bubble sort, and we're going to sort in alphabetical order. So we're going to go from A to Z in alphabetical order. That's what we're going to do. But the other thing that this program does as well is it inputs the name. So the user actually puts the names in that they want to have sorted. Rather than having a predefined array, this actually, you're going to put the numbers in. Now the other thing that happens here is that the array, we create the array to start with 10 empty blank spaces. So we're going to input 10 names essentially, right? So we better go through and look at our declarations to start with, the numbers that we've declared, the variables that we've declared to start with, or the constants we've declared to start with. So for example here's our array. I've got A for array equals an empty string, so there's nothing inside that string, times 10. So that means we're going to have an array with 10 positions that are empty. All of them have just, they're ready for a string, but they don't have anything in them. Now remember, when we've got an array with 10 positions, the index number starts at 0. So it's going to be 0 to 9 is going to be our range. Okay, so 0 to 9 is our range, not 1 to 10, because we don't count 1, we start off counting at 0. So that's the first thing, we've got an array. The second thing is we have a variable called t, which has nothing in it. Okay, and later in the program, we're going to use that as kind of like a temporary variable or a transfer variable where we can move information from one variable to the other and move things around. It's going to help us transfer things, change positions of the words. The next one we have L, which is the total number of names. It's going to be L. It's going to be 10. We're going to have a total number of names. And C will be a counter which will be used in the loops. Now, this is different from in the last program. We actually did in range of, and then we had different numbers. Here, we're stating them clearly to start with. We're stating there are 10 things in our array, and we are starting at 0, and we're going to count up and down and so on and so forth. So it's being really crystal clear about how we start here. So step number 1. For C in range of L. So in other words, I want you to count up to 10. That's what I want you to do. I want you to count up to 10 from 0, count up to 10, and each time you count up to 10, in the variable A, which is our list, I want you to put in the index number, which is going to be the position for this loop in here. So the first time through it's going to be A0. Next time it's going to be A1. Next time will be A2, so on and so forth. I want you to enter a number. So what we're doing here essentially is we're filling up our array at the top here with names. We're going to get 10 names and we're going to put them in here. And this just loops through. This is a simple for loop to loop through 10 times to make sure that we get 10 names in there. So that's the first bit. That should be pretty simple. You should already understand that. Now the second bit, we're going to go through our bubble sort. And remember when we did the bubble sort for the numbers, we have an outer loop and an inner loop. So this is the outer loop, right? And we're starting for a count at 0, and we're going to loop up to L. So we're going to count 10 times, right? So as we go through the loop 10 times, each time it goes through, it's going to sort the first number compared to the first name compared to the second name, and then the first name compared to the second name, the first name compared to the second name. Same as we did with the numbers, except this time it's going to be comparing them in alphabetical order. That's what it's going to do. Now, here's the inner loop. So this is the inner loop in here, and we've created this variable called L index, which is going to be the index number of the inner loop position, and it goes up to a range of 9. And this is where it was different from last time. Last time we did n minus 1, but we're not doing it here. We're just saying, right, we're only going to go up to 9, right? So we're comparing the index numbers. We're not comparing the actual numbers in here. We're looking at the index numbers up to 9 so that we can compare the actual numbers. Right, in here, this is where we do the same thing as we did with the greater than, less than. So if A, our first word, our first name is bigger than our second name, because this is the position plus 1. If that is, then we're going to swap them over. Now the swap over is a little bit different here. We're not going to do the same way that we wrote the maths one. We're doing it a little bit differently. What we're going to do is we're going to use this temporary variable to put the first name into. Then we're going to copy from index position 0 essentially here up to index position 1. And then we're going to go back to index position 1 and we're going to put the variable back in here. So this is like a temporary variable that's going to store one of the names while we transfer one over and then transfer back again into here. All right, so this is just the moving of things, moving things around. And all of that is based on, does the condition here meet greater than or less than? Now in this situation, we're saying greater than is starting at a higher letter, right? So it understands greater than as Z is higher than A, for example, right? If you swap around the other way around, you could do it in reverse order. You could have it for last names first, and then like Z letters first, and then A's at the end. But we're just going to leave it like this to start with. Now the last bit here is going to print out your sorted list, and it's going to say what the name is, the position that it's coming from, and what it actually is, what the actual name is. So let's run this again and see if we can understand how this works. I've got to put 10 names in, so it'll take a little bit of time, but let's go through. Let's go John, Peter, Paul, Ringo. Let's put some girls' names in, Mary, Sarah, Jane. Let's put in some strange letter ones. Zion, so we got a Z in there. There's an Alice, so we got an A in there. Let's put in Bob. Oh, Bob. Okay, so now we can go through, and I put in a few of these names on purpose with an A and a Z just so we can check. So we can see Alice has moved to the first position. Bob is second, Jane, John, Mary, Paul, Peter, Ringo. So it's put them in alphabetical order. And in fact, I could check this even by printing this array A. So if I go to here and go print in brackets A, my array, it'll show me the same thing in order, but this time I can see the array. This one just prints it in a nice way for you to see it, right? So again, this is a sort, this is a bubble sort, but this one's using strings rather than using numbers, okay? You really need to watch the number one first so you understand how this little index thing works here, but the sorting is a pretty simple process. Just remembering that greater than with strings works in alphabetical order. If you do less than, then it'll work in reverse alphabetical order, okay? That's it, that's a bubble sort.